I was in Melbourne earlier this week to participate in ANZSOG's annual conference. Now ANZSOG, that's the Australia-New Zealand School of Government. It's an organisation that trains government officials, bureaucrats from all Australian state governments, the Australian federal government, and of course the New Zealand government. What was interesting talking to delegates at the conference was that there was a marked difference between Australian and New Zealand delegates. The Australian delegates told me that they were basically despairing about their system of politics. I heard them say that Australian politics was broken, that their system of government was broken, whereas New Zealand delegates were by and large relatively happy with government structures here. And I thought that was quite a nice link to the theme of the conference, because the conference was all about transparency. Transparency in policy making, transparency in decision making. And on reflection, I think that is the biggest difference really between politics in Australia and politics in New Zealand. It's something that I wrote about last year in my little book, The Quiet Achievers. And I argued that if you're comparing the style of the current key government to the current Australian government and its predecessors, you can see one big difference. Our government is simply better at explaining why it is doing the reforms it is doing than, say, the governments of Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard, or now Tony Abbott. And I think this establishing of narratives is really important, and it links to the question of transparency, because you have to be transparent about what you're doing, you have to be transparent about how you're doing it, and then you have to be transparent about why you're doing what you're doing as a government. That was the main lesson from the conference for me, and I think if we are taking this into account, if we're better at explaining what it is that we're trying to achieve, how we're doing it, if we're trying to take the people with us on this policy reform process, we've got a much better chance of implementing reforms. So from that perspective, I think it was a really useful conference for me, but it was even more interesting to see what a marked difference there is nowadays between Australian and New Zealand bureaucrats and politicians. I am actually quite concerned about the state of politics in Australia, and I think the Australians might learn a thing or two from the New Zealand experience.